Welcome everybody to podcast number 2 of Language Portals. With me today is my very special guest, Andrea Hiott. She has written a book that will be out very soon, and we are going to talk about it. Let me give you a short introduction to who Andrea is and what all the wonderful things she's already accomplished in life. So Andrea has degrees in philosophy, neuroscience, and urban heritage. She has studied and taught around the world in places including, but probably not limited to, the list is probably longer than what I'm going to read, Berlin, Heidelberg, the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, and is currently at the University of Utrecht. Andrea has also written many books on a variety of topics, from the VW Beetle to embodied cognition to books that develop her original ideas on the navigational approach to embodied science. So we today are going to converse about one of her forthcoming books called Holding Paradox, a navigational approach to mind and consciousness. And there was something else to it, the gifts, other gifts of the hippocampus.
Yes, exactly.
Andrea also has her own podcast and a Substack. And you can probably find all of those at her website, which is Andrea Hiott, HIOTT.com. Welcome, Andrea, to Language Portals. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. So great to be here. I should say I'm in Heidelberg, but that's okay. I mean, I'm actually technically in New York right now, but Heidelberg, not Utrecht. But otherwise, yeah.
Okay.
And one place I taught that you might find interesting is Mongolia.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah. Just from a linguistic point of view. But that would be maybe another conversation, but I'll just throw it out there.
Okay, great. So one of the metaphors in the book is journeys. So I picked that metaphor as kind of like an overarching theme for how to structure our conversation today. So basically the itinerary for our little journey today, and we can of course go off this itinerary. There are often little, nooks and crannies to explore. But first, I thought we'd talk about your journey to how you got to the point of writing this particular book. And then you could give a little bit like the highlights of the historical journey regarding neuroscience and the hippocampus. And then particularly your innovation to that field, which is the title of your book, which is Holding Paradox. And then, since your podcast is about philosophy and love, I'd like to bring all this back to love and then carry it forward into hope.
Oh, that sounds marvelous.
Great. So tell us a little bit about your journey. Like, how did you get to the point where you knew you had to write this book?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, honestly, it's one of those things where you look back and you've been writing it sort of your whole life in different ways. I mean, I was always very interested in what mind is and connecting it to movement and trying to think of it kind of beyond normal bounds. I would say, I guess a lot of us have that feeling as kids that we think of mind as more expansive, and you're kind of in connection with. My grandfather had a farm, so I was around a lot of animals and thinking about plants a lot, and I just felt mind was everywhere, expansive and dynamic, and I used kaleidoscopic a lot, or sort of prismatic is how I remember it as a kid, and I wanted to understand that. It turned me on, it's always motivated me. And I think what I started figuring out was that a lot of people wanted me to put things in certain boxes, which tended to be contrasted, you know, which this is the way we organize the world. And it's like perfectly helpful and wonderful in a lot of ways, these contraries. But something about that felt too static relative to this like prismatic, kinetic, overflowing, maybe a little bit too caring kind of kid that I was. And I think out of that, I started reading a lot, and fiction, poetry, a lot of mystical kind of things, probably like Simone Weil or Anne Frank. You know, as a kid, I thought I was Anne Frank for some reason, like, you know, reading her journal. These kind of identifications with sort of tragic figures, but ones that felt the world, you know, deeply. And I guess that moved into what more, you know, Nietzsche and Alan Watts and that kind of philosophy. But I didn't think I would study philosophy, and I thought I would study law. I don't know why. Maybe it was the logic and trying to figure out the world. But my first philosophy class blew that wide open, because then I realized this is actually something you can do with your life. And once I realized that, there was no turning back, because it had already been there, you know, the thread. And this was just kind of, you know, you had that realization where, oh, this is actually a choice you can make to do in your life. I just hadn't thought of it like that. Even though at the time, I mean, now it's very cool to be a philosopher. Who knows in 5 years if it is, but at that time it was not. It was not cool to say, oh, I'm going to be, well, I guess my friends thought it was cool, but my parents definitely not. Like, going to not be a lawyer. Oh, I'm going to be a philosopher. You know this too? I feel like even as I'm telling this story, I want to hear if it resonates with your story, because I feel we might be kindred in a way. Yeah, so that's how it happened. I just, it was more about understanding mind. And of course, at that time, everyone was starting to say the mind is the brain. And I wanted to understand, what does that mean? Is it really in the brain? And I started reading a lot about the brain, ended up going to, I wrote all my early like philosophy stuff on German philosophers, mostly Hegel, which fits with that contrary synthesizing feeling that I was talking about. But I thought, oh, I can't even speak German. Something is wrong. You should be able to read it in the language. So I ended up in Berlin to study German, but also philosophy. And just through kind of being really interested in the brain, ended up sitting in on classes. I was really in love with Humboldt University because Hegel had taught there, but also Alexander Humboldt is another person that's always inspired me a lot from another angle, because I'm very interested in how we explore the world and movement in that sense, which is why I've explored that too in other ways. So that's how I ended up there, just sitting in on neuroscience classes. I don't know how, that someone let me do that. And I was just sitting in on all these really hard neuroscience classes with some really important people who ended up sort of co-founding the school, Berlin School of Mind and Brain. And that's where I ended up doing my neuroscience degree. So I did study neuroscience. I worked in hospitals and labs, but always as a philosopher. I had to do the hard stuff. I wanted to learn it, but I really don't, like, people like to call me a neuroscientist, but I have friends who are neuroscientists who are in labs doing that kind of work, and I'm not. I mean, I might be sometimes, but not that kind of work. I'm still trying to understand, how do we tell the narrative of mind in a different way through all this amazing research they're doing. That's what it really kind of turns me on. So that's how I kind of knew, okay, I have to write this book, because what happened was I was very interested in thinking, how does memory connect with moving through the world? And it just happened to be really perfect timing, in the sense that this area of the brain called the hippocampus has been connected with both of those. But when I was studying, people were starting to really think of it in a new way, relative to, for example, I'll say it in a more metaphorical sense, like this area of the brain is important for how we like, it's like a GPS of the brain. And it's also really important for memory. And so people started thinking of conceptual space, or something like memory kind of space, or other sorts of space that we're also making our way through. I'm making it very metaphorical, but you can see how this connected for me with another way to think about the world that wasn't putting everything into those categories of, for example, mental and physical and, all of this. And that, I guess, was the thread. And I don't know when exactly I decided I had to write the book, but I'd been thinking about it a lot. And it was part of all my work. And I just thought I'd try to tell the story in a way that is a little more accessible. But yeah, I think that story shows I've probably been writing it since I was a kid. I don't know, isn't this what kind of happens? There's certain things that won't leave you alone,
Yeah, exactly. And so the story of the hippocampus is like it's a story with stories within it, and that's how you tell it in the book. I mean, you go into a lot of detail, and we don't really have time to go into a whole lot of detail here about, like all the different people, for example, who had their hippocampus removed, and that's how we learned a lot of what functions it manages. But could you give maybe like the highlights of the story of the hippocampus, enough for us to get a feel for like what the core tension you already mentioned, mind and movement, memory and movement, and mental and physical, but just like take us through a little bit of how the field of neuroscience came to understand these very different functions that the hippocampus serves.
Yeah, so first I'll just apologize to neuroscientists because I think you have to talk in different ways when you're trying to talk about different sorts of parts of this story.
And to different audiences too. We have
a different
audience here, yeah.
So it would be weird for me to try to be really specific. So I'll just tell it in a more general sense, but it's not wrong. It's just, there's a lot more to it, as with everything, right? So I think if you think about like the 1950s when neuroscience was really starting, we didn't even call it neuroscience. It was psychology. Still, a lot of people call it that. So there wasn't a neuroscience degree or anything, but people were studying how, these things we experience that seem so crucial to who we are, what's going on in the body, and people would become very interested in the brain and what's going on in the brain. And around this time, I won't go into all the different patients, but what happened was this area of the brain was being taken out from people who had epilepsy, the hippocampus. It's like a seahorse-shaped area that you have in both sides of your brain. And so when it was taken out, they were finding that people couldn't function properly in terms of remembering their lives or creating new memories. It's almost like the path of their life sort of ended suddenly in terms of what they could connect to it, what they could remember. And there's a lot of studies that were done then, like Brenda Milner, I have to just at least mention her. She's a scientist who's still alive in her hundreds, but she was at McGill University, which is kind of like a superhero headquarters for what would become neuroscience. Like everyone was there. And she was one of them. And she worked with the patient, HM. And out of that, we started to understand that the hippocampus definitely is crucial for whatever that train is that is us able to continually align and connect our lives as memory. So that, often a lot of what we're experiencing is very similar to what's come before. So we were kind of adding, new things to that and creating, especially when our attention is taken. But when you hurt the hippocampus in certain ways, and it's even broader than the hippocampus, but this area, hippocampal area, you can't do that anymore. That's what they found, to just put it really bluntly. So, wow, right? I mean, this was kind of amazing. It's like one of the early examples where when you actually damage some part of the brain, it changes your experience of being a human on a level that's really personal and intimate. And that even those around you notice more than you in a way, because, these patients, for example, they would be working with Brenda Milner and she would remember them, but each day she would have to reintroduce herself, So this was obviously a big deal and still is in the literature. But so that was sort of what you can think of that as like one opposite if we're going to put things in these categories. And they really were for a long time and still are for a lot of people. But in the 70s, with people who came out of that same university, John O'Keefe had been there, and Lynn Nadell, who comes into the story later, and some of the things that they had learned at that time that they were working on, and then with a little bit of accident, John O'Keefe realized that there were actually cells in the same part of the brain that would fire in relation to where you are in the environment. And that can sound crazy, right? We think of science fiction as that kind of a thing, where you actually have your body is somehow firing in relation to what you're moving through. You know, they called them place cells, but there's also border cells, head direction cells, this sort of whole collection, almost like a mandala, right, of cellular activity that's firing in relation to the mandala that is the world around you. So that was pretty cool. But it didn't fit at all, seemingly at the time, with all the literature about memory, because, you know, we thought movement is like a physical movement through the world, and memory is something that's stored in your brain, right? So how do you deal with this? And these seem like very much contradictions, so that you needed to explain one by the other. One came first, for example, and then the other one developed out of that. That was kind of like still what a lot of people try to do. And so that was not holding the paradox. That is trying to dissolve one side into the other, which is what we do a lot. You know, if you've studied philosophy and psychology, you see this everywhere. Categories, contrasts, trying to dissolve one into the other. Or even synthesizing becomes a kind of dissolving, such that one is primary, you know, and we have, everyone takes a side and we argue which one is primary. That's changing a lot now through work like you're doing and so many people are doing. And that's what I'm trying to kind of bring out through this example with the holding paradox, which you're not trying to dissolve, resolve, you're starting constellating, right? You're noticing what else is connecting and you're opening up possibilities. But just to stay with the hippocampus, that was kind of the two amazing stories. And in neuroscience, these are both really exciting stories full of great characters and wonderful scientists and people just, you know, a lot of patients too who went through a lot. And it's, you know, it's a real human, complicated story of learning about these things that we take as who we are. Our memories that's our remembering. I think of it as an action because it is, in my view, is so connected to who we are. And it's so fragile and vulnerable and delicate to imagine losing it. And we know people who've gone through this, right? And we've gone through different things in our own lives where it's harder to think or it's harder to remember. And it's so connected to who you experience the world as, right? And also to your bodily ability to make your way through all these different spaces, whether they're geographical or conversational or emotional or whatever. So I think a lot of this last 50 years of trying to understand what's going on in the hippocampus can actually be seen in a wider level of trying to understand these other problems like mind-body, you know, these other dualisms. They all line up in certain ways with this literature. And so what we've seen in this literature is that, you know, people put it in terms of we think in the way we navigate, or we navigate in the way we think, or thinking is a kind of navigation. And so sometimes that sounds like you're still trying to make one into the other. And it's important to kind of get to the nuance of that. It's not one is the other, but you can see how we can't resolve this. And therefore, scientifically, something else is having to happen. And it's happening in hippocampus research. It's happening, I think, in a lot of areas of science and biology with a lot of work that, you know, even like with Michael Levin and his work, you know, you're seeing this where the spaces that we've taken as normal and like that we've just decided this is what physical space is, this is what mental space is, they don't connect. And now we're getting, oh, actually, as you said, all of those are fractalized kind of areas of life that don't neatly fit anywhere, and the linear model doesn't work anymore. And how do we understand this, right? In the actual literature of the hippocampus research, you find this. There's almost a kind of perilous at some moment, even in my own study of it, where you just can't take it in. It's how can we move through conceptual space, you know, in the way we move through geographical space? Like this makes us stretch old categories of what we've considered self, body, world. For me, it relates a lot to more ecological notions of what mind is, what, embodiment. But, I won't get specific in the research, but in the research itself, this is really something that's become very, very rich. And there's lots of different ways people are trying to kind of understand this. But I think in the bigger picture, for me, it is about sitting in the tension of, yes, we've had something called memory and remembering and thinking and even knowing that has been one way we've moved through the world. And at the same time, we also move through the world in geographical spaces, emotional spaces. And all of this is the waymaking. It's not happening in different spaces, really. It's all happening. But because it's so much to take in, we've had to study it in these different kinds of fractal nested layers. And we've categorized those as contrast because that was probably all we could handle.
Yeah.
But now we're trying to do that thing of holding two contradictory ideas in mind at once and not go crazy. And as I was trying to say with the literature, it's hard not to go crazy because it really changes the way that you've been aligning with the world with your thinking. So I think that's what's happening in this space of science in a very rigorous way that's hard for people to really see right now, but that I'm trying to maybe generalize enough that it becomes obvious. And in a way, I've had a lot of talks with people like Lynn Nadell, who wrote The Hippocampus as a Cognitive Map, with John O'Keefe, who is part of that literature. And I've had a lot of talks with other neuroscientists, and there is a way in which it is starting to become kind of obvious that people don't anymore talk about which came first necessarily. But I think the wider implication for actually what this means for how we understand cognition as a bodily action that we're studying in many fractal ways, and how that opens us to explore what's actually happening in our communication as the world with the world, is just barely beginning.
I like the image you use of going up the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's only one mountain, but the mind people go up it one way and the brain people go up it another way. And you can't you can't talk about getting up the mountain on this path by being on this path and vice versa. But when you see that there are two paths, you also see that there's a third and a fourth and a fifth and a sixth. And then there's the bird flying by that isn't even on the mountain, but it can see it from a wholly different perspective.
Wonderful, yeah. That's a great way to say it. That idea has helped me so much. I think it's part of why this navigational mind is so helpful, to think of it through those ways. Because, I mean, in a way it's a metaphor, but it's also kind of ontologically true, this way that memory is our movement with the world. But when you just say it like that, it can sound so abstract. But if you do think of it as in a landscape and through sort of Gibsonian affordances or something, or even different ways that people do computational modeling with landscapes and state space and phase space. But if you just think of it even just like you're a familiar landscape, you can't fold that landscape and put one on top of the other.
No.
So you don't put the bird's path on top of the human path and dissolve them together. And you don't even put two different paths up the mountain on top of each other and dissolve them. Like, to do that, which is what we've been trying to do in a lot of science, is kind of like, why would we try to do that? Maybe we would try to do that just so we notice the mountain differently. Maybe that's where we are now. And now we're noticing, oh, these are just different paths exploring a common space. Whereas before we were trying to figure out, like, it's almost like we thought we had taken the same path and we were fighting about what we'd seen on that path.
Yeah.
But of course we'd seen different things because we were on different sides of the mountain. So now we can actually, if we can find ways to communicate about what we've seen from those paths, we actually learn more about that shared space.
Yeah. You actually have a really good quote about the the confusion of the categories that gets introduced when we try to like merge them. You say, we have been looking in the physical realm, meaning the brain, for something, namely memories, that we have defined as not findable in that domain. I mean, that just blows the paradox wide open right there.
Yeah, I'm glad you understood that, because I think if you've practiced with paradox and contradiction, that makes sense, but it's hard to write it in a way that makes sense. But it is what we've been doing, right? And that's and because it's so confusing is exactly the reason we keep doing it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's like we can't see what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a blind spot. It's a blind spot in our thinking, because we haven't been holding the paradox. So let's dive into that now, because that is, that's the innovation that I want to read another quote that I think is just brilliant. Where did I put it here? Here we go. We create opposites in order to realize them. We create opposites in order to realize them. Words like mental and physical become ways for us to notice our capacities for consciousness and action. And this noticing opens up a third way, a place we can step beyond those dualities and contrasts, which is also a way into another realm of experience and potential. Do you want to riff off of that?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking about also what you said about memory, that like it's not stored, and once you, I think the third way is coming up a lot, right? In a lot of traditions, it's something we've been trying to learn for a long time, but often even in my study of Hegel, you can get stuck in the third way too, and it becomes another opposite.
Right. Yeah.
That's kind of what synthesis can be. But I think there's something else going on in a lot of writings, and in what I see in the hippocampal research and what I'm trying to express in that quote you just read, which the third is almost like the portal, right? You have to go through it, but you also have to be really aware. And so it's kind of, there's that prismatic or kaleidoscopic image again, or I think of it as constellatory now, like a constellation. So you're stepping to the third, and then, oh my gosh, like the universe opens up, right? And can you handle it? Can you go through? Can you handle that? I think it's maybe we haven't been able to handle it. I'm not even sure. Like right now, we're really being tested in a way of can we handle that other sensory possibility? Which by sensory, I really mean also cognitive and mental. It's physical and mental and emotional and spiritual. And I think we've been invited there through over, hundreds of years. And some people have walked in through that portal via the third. But a lot of people stay there on the ledge of the third and preach to everyone who is still in the twos about coming to the third. Not that that's a bad thing to do, right? But I think at some point, the ledge is going to get really crowded. And what we have to do is constellate and start habituating in that other way, which won't be the end of it either. But it's definitely another way of being alive together that feels like it wants us to do that.
Yeah. I really like your idea of the third as being a portal. Because you do have to be able to hold the opposites in their dynamic tension and not, like side with one or the other, in order to get to the third, which takes you to the fourth and the fifth and the sixth, and just multiplicity. You know, before you can really handle multiplicity, you do need to be able to handle just the polarities.
I would disagree just a minute. I don't think
Okay.
I don't think I actually disagree with you, but just because I do find the nuance very important here about yeah, it's not that we sort of go to the third and then we've left the two behind and then we go to a fourth and a fifth. Like for me, there's something much harder that happens that I find we don't have words for, and the way you describe it is a way to describe it, but it's almost that you can't you have to still hold the tension of the two in opposition the whole time, and the linear thing is no longer there. You don't go next step, next step, next step anymore. There's not a next and then the next and then the next. Instead, it's more what we're trying to get a grasp on with complex systems and, you know.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
so instead you're almost having to hold the fact this rhythm or movement of that you're in opposition almost to many points at once. And where you put your attention will be where the path aligns relative to all that. Does that make sense? So it's almost like we even have to get out of the linear ladder-like thing. And I think that's actually what's so hard about it, because you can tell right now even it's we don't even really have words to talk about that unless you get very mystical. I do think kaleidoscopes and prisms and these kinds of things have been used to try to do that. But yeah, so I just wanted to note that. I don't think we're saying anything different, but you see what I mean? There's something different.
I do see what you mean. Yeah. I had a certain image in my head, an illustration that I'm working on for my next book, which is where that was coming from. But I can see, well, I can see where I'm coming from and I can see where you're coming from. And this is the kind of activity that we're doing when we're holding the opposites. You know, like I can see that I've got my perspective, you've got your perspective. They're not exactly aligned, but they're not, one's right and one's wrong either.
Exactly.
They're different ways of, as you say, assessing, how do you say it? Assessing the landscape.
Assessing what is, the landscape. Yeah, I think that's right. And that's why I wanted to get into it a little bit, because probably we can help each other open up further, right? Because it doesn't have to be that we don't use the linear numbers. But for me, it's like, you know, it's this kind of living constellating. So as you move, those numbers, that ladder, which you could always see, will also be changing. So in a way, there's like multiple possible 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7s. So as you said, it's not that you have to get rid of that, but instead you're almost like holding multiple possibilities of those ladders. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this fits in with that too. You say that there are not, oh, and this gets into the fact that we're dealing with processes, you know, that both memory and navigating are indeed processes. So you say there are not two separate processes, the mental and the physical, and there is also not one process. There is simply process, and it is continuous. There is not a beginning or an end, though there are beginnings and ends from every unique position of assessment. We explore process as process from different perspectives, and those perspectives can no more be combined than different paths up a mountain.
It's kind of what I was trying to express, with our differing examples and holding them. And I think it's very hard to do that, to not think of everything as one.
Yeah.
And just leave it at that. And instead of thinking of, we're going to assess it as one, but we don't really, it's not really one because there's no beginning or end. We don't know. That's why I introduced the term waymaking, which I don't think I actually use in that book. Maybe I mentioned it once or something, I'm not sure. But in the sort of wider philosophy that I've been developing for all these years, waymaking is where you have to begin with a navigability approach. You just have to acknowledge it. And that acknowledgement is that we don't know if there's a beginning or end, because those are the binaries that we're holding in tension, and there's something else. Well, we don't know. So you have to acknowledge that all is process, and it's not one, it's not one. It can be understood through 1, 2, 3, 4, but it's actually not absolutely accessible, and there isn't a beginning or end, which we can't even fathom what that means. But we have to acknowledge it in this process that the kind of more methodological. It's just an acknowledgement, and only then can you get really robust with the science. Because right now we decide we're going to find the absolute answer, then we take a side and we build the ladder, and everything that doesn't fit on that ladder must be wrong. And as I said, I think that's been a really good organizing principle and can remain so. However, if we begin with the waymaking, we understand it's just that we're trying our best from a particular position in a particular landscape, noticing the movement, and we can be really rigorous about that. And it's giving us something very real in that moment. But to think it's going to like solve everything in all positions of the constellation, there's no reason that we need to even begin there or even think that that's what we're trying to do. If anything, we get much more rigorous from all our positions because we each have something unique to share, and we find ways to better share that. It's like picking up the current scaffold and shifting it very much in science. This is not the way we design experiments. It's not kind of the way we think about science. But for me, beginning with the acknowledgement of the waymaking makes us be able to move that scaffold and become more rigorous and communicate better and build better representations. Yeah, I'm not sure why I got into that.
And build the loopiness into not just the science, but the way we perceive. And there's a little nuance that I want to bring out that I think is really important that you brought out in your book. That in our moving through the world, we are not just, okay, how do I say this? We're aligning our body to the environment, and we're aligning it to ourselves simultaneously. And that I think is a kind of a difficult concept to grasp, because it seems like you're doing very different things at the same time, which you are. But let me just, I had an aha the other day when I was out walking with a friend, and it came to me that, oh my God, this is how that works. So we were walking by the Lake Michigan, and there are thousands upon thousands of spiders in the fence along the lake.
Oh, wow.
And I have walked that path, hundreds, maybe even thousands of times. And those spiders are, they've never hurt me. They're always there. They're eating the bugs. We love them for eating the bugs. And to me, like, the spiders did not evoke any kind of fear response, because they're just a familiar part of, that path. The person I was walking with is not native to Chicago, and saw all those spiders and had this, incredible fear response. So even though we are literally like walking the same environmental path, the internal processing paths were completely different. My friend was having, a fear response. What is that? Acetylcholine, if you want to get, chemical about it. And I was not. And so the the formation of the memories of walking that path were very different because of the interaction of that, the response to the external and the response to the internal.
I think that's a beautiful example. And there's so many things in there that exemplify a lot of different threads. I mean, first of all, yeah, that path that you are, right, extends, as you kind of made clear there, all from the moment of your birth till now, right? You've had experiences that give you that reaction as you're walking, and you wouldn't think it's abnormal. And in fact, the kind of default would be everyone just acts
Yeah, right.
because you wouldn't think about it, right? If you thought about it,
Yeah.
you say, oh yeah, probably someone else might not. But just the default of your bodily cognition is that that is the way everyone acts when they walk past a fence with spiders on it. And so for your friend, this is completely different, right? For them, it would be like, of course, if you walk past a fence with lots of spiders on it, you freak out because, you know. So, I mean, both of you would be assuming that's normal. And from each other's position, the other would seem very not normal. And there is no normal there. It's just that the path of experience, the regularities that you've aligned with, if we think of it in a navigability way, that your body's literally aligning with constantly, it never stops. You know how to navigate that world in a certain way, and they know how to navigate that world in a certain way, and your reactions change. But then even another nested level of that wonderful example, you've both changed each other's paths now, because you will probably never walk past that fence without remembering that there's a completely different way to walk past that fence.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And same for your friend.
Same for them. Yeah.
Yeah. And they will also probably be calmer because they know you can be calm and you've been there and you've been through it and so on. So it will help, right? So isn't that amazing, right? And we do this all the time. I mean, this is life. And I think it's really wonderful to start thinking of it through that way. And instead of in blocks and chunks and static things, like thinking of it as these paths that never stop, that are, you know, you can shift paths all the time, right? In terms of your attention. But your body's like this web of, sorry, spiders, but it's this ongoing dynamic flow of paths. That's better, and landscapes. And so, wow, I mean, just think how many more paths there are that we don't notice or know about that are possible as the essential bodies that we are. But another thing you said that I think is very important when you were talking about the nuance is that we take this conversation with ourselves as if it is our full bodily cognition and self. And that's a very hard nuance to realize, that what we know about ourselves and what we've attended to is like kind of the tip of the iceberg of actual cognition, of actual waymaking, of actual what's happening as we move through spaces. In the same way that you didn't have to think about being afraid of spiders and all of this kind of stuff. You would just walk along the path and so on. But there's so many other things, right, that you don't have to think about and that you don't think about that have become aligned with your regularity so that you can move through the world. And that's true in geographical space, but it's also true in emotional space and conceptual space and conversational space and linguistic space, and whatever kind of set of regularities you can begin to assess, you know, as we do, it's true there. And we don't, that's like amazing, right? Because that means we're capable of, and even sort of aligning in all of those worlds in ways that we've hardly even, maybe never even actually put our attention on. So in our conversation with ourselves, we're still very mysterious.
And the regularities that we are least conscious of, at least according to like Donella Meadows' places to intervene in a system, those are the hardest ones to see, and particularly the hardest ones to disrupt. You know, like if we're trying to develop a new way of doing science, you know, those kinds of regularities that we've been taught and that our parents were taught and grandparents were taught, and that are really like conditioned into the culture, are the hardest ones to break. And in some ways, those are the ones right now that we're needing to at least question, you know?
Absolutely. And that's what holding the opposites open, letting the oppositional be, but opening and exploring the space around it helps us do. I think it's also why people can seem kind of crazy or annoying, or there's a lot of friction when we do try to communicate about seeing different ways, whether it's a new scientific theory, or it's just a way that we see the world that maybe someone in our family doesn't. You can get so your body becomes so almost like you feel like, okay, this must be wrong because I just want to run out of the room. And sometimes you should run out of the room, but sometimes the point is to sit in the friction a bit, and because it's a sign that you've maybe gotten yourself towards a third way, towards a portal. And how to understand, how to differentiate and discern that is, I think, why we need each other, why we need safe communities where we can communicate, why we need science that allows us to be a little bit crazy sometimes, but also hold each other in check. So, finding that, how to do that together, I think is really hard. I mean, just in my own life, I found that so challenging as someone who's in so many different worlds and not always like trying to translate, but not always able to. And I think this is really rich work that a lot of people are doing, but it's really hard work too.
It is. There's a good German word that I learned from Alfred Schutz and Thomas Lockman called Bewusstseinsspannung.
Oh, wow, that's great. Yeah.
And correct me if there's a better translation, but it's the tension of opposites. It's holding that tension.
Mm-hmm. I think that, yeah, I mean, that word has so many things in it. I mean, it has like mind and consciousness and even a kind of excitement, and yeah, the pulling, and it's a wonderful, wonderful word. But I think that thinking of it like that is wonderful, because that's why we get so animated. That's why we get so angry. That's why we get so we have this, we want this ladder to lead us to where whatever is going to be the answer. And when someone shows us that there's another ladder leading somewhere else, it's so dissonant and so frustrating at first, especially if we think we have to choose between those, that one must be right and one must be wrong. So I think what I've been trying to do, and maybe what you also in your work is just, I mean, it's like going back to, okay, we can have both ladders, everyone, and we can build cool ways to communicate from those ladders about what we see, so that we understand this space even more from both of them. And then you get a little more wiggle room, right? Maybe you still want to compete and race up the ladder and try to get somewhere. Like that's all okay in certain ways, but it's a completely different way of approaching what science is. Instead of, you got to find the right way and everyone else is the wrong way.
Yeah. So I'd like to bring it back, as I said at the beginning, to love. Your podcast is Love and Philosophy, and I like how you always bring it back to love when you talk to people. And my reason for doing this is because we can get very abstract and philosophical / scientific, but the important thing when it comes to doing this work, as we were talking about at the beginning, is how does it affect people's lives? And one thing that really struck me that you said in your book was that it broke your heart when you learned about patient HM and how they didn't try to help him. Yeah. And I mean, that really touched my heart too. And so If you want to talk a little bit about that, and also how might like your insights in this book that you've written be extrapolated to help people caught in this mental physical paradox, you know, such as like psychiatric patients, or not even like psychotic people, but even depressed people who are given, you know, they've got psychological or mental issues, but it's treated like, oh, you have a chemical imbalance in your brain, here, take this drug.
Yeah.
Um,
And then the drugs cause all kind of other stuff
yeah,
because it changes the landscape. Yeah, I think we're in a
yeah,
real mess with a lot of that. And
yeah,
thank you for noticing that and bringing that out, because it's really probably the answer to your first question is probably like, or whatever, when you're asking why did I do this, is really actually that I really, and I try not to talk about it too much because it really does affect me, first of all, and it's very personal. But also, you know, you sound like kind of too sentimental or something, which is okay. I mean, I have a podcast called Love and Philosophy because I want to push at that. I think sentimentality and love and care are so important that we shouldn't close off from them. So I will try to go here with you. Um, I've seen a lot of people suffer, either close in my family or in my friendships or in, you know, whatever, animals, even when I was a kid. But also when I read through the literature and when I've studied neuroscience with HM, but with a lot of people, somehow it often strikes me the way we're talking about them, and even the way that the dynamic is. And I don't mean to say anything bad about scientists, because I love scientists. I trained in science. But there's some dynamic about the way a subject-object dynamic that really hurts me when I think about. I think it's probably also because I've seen that maybe there were other things possible, but we were so focused on the linear route that we didn't even explore it. When people are really suffering, if you can try to, what's their landscape of regularities? You know, we don't
yeah,
ask that
yeah,
in these ways. We don't, we do kind of what your wonderful story helps me illustrate. We just assume that nobody will be scared of the spiders, right? But what if we had looked at this whole path of what was going on? Even you're very, you've done some amazing work with language, and I often think, even with HM, maybe he couldn't talk, maybe he couldn't speak about what he was remembering, or there's so many levels at which we're just assuming that his behavior shows us something that has to fit into this kind of box, that I
yeah,
think if we had been able to constellate that and try just even have a kind of framework where we could imagine other ways that this path might be experiencing this landscape as this person, there probably would have been more alleviation, even just certain ways, like changes in his environment and things that I won't get into all the details. But once I've started to really see this, I think there could have been so many ways to just literally give him a little bit more alleviation. And maybe people were doing that. There's a lot written about him, but I think the larger people were doing that. It's not like they were trying to hurt him or something. They were doing their best. But
yeah,
I think with the binary way that we come at something like memory loss, but also, as you said, something like depression, something like schizophrenia, we've labeled these things and we try to fit them into the box. I mean, there's all kind of talk now about the DSM and how limited it is. But until we really start habituating differently in the practice of mental health care and the practice of physical health care, the practice of all kinds of care, until we really have a kind of different framework, which I'm trying to present, just, it's one, maybe there'll be many others, I think, but just one that's not binary based and not, that is trying to kind of stay on that third space a minute and see the world as a constellation rather than either or. If we had scientific frameworks that at least allow us to start to do that, I just think that a lot of these ways that people are suffering could be alleviated better, because when we try to fit them into whatever our regularities are, it's going to be much more painful than if we try to understand what they care about, what they're caring towards. I really think the urge, the mattering of life is care. And no matter what you're suffering from, you're caring for something and towards something. What is it, right? What is it in those moments, right? When they're so anxious or they're so depressed or whatever, what is it they're caring towards or not caring towards? What is the orientation and the disorientation? It's probably like you have to see it from their path, and you have to try to understand their landscape to be able to understand how you can help them move. But right now, I feel like we just try to see it from our landscape, like we're not afraid of the spiders, and so they're not afraid of the spiders, but maybe they are, right? Maybe that's just something we didn't think about. And I mean that in those other senses. So it really does get to care for me, and I really think it does for everyone, actually. I think scientists are doing what they do because they usually, there's some who maybe they just care about being famous, which is a kind of care too. But a lot of scientists really start because they really care about helping people or what consciousness is, or,
I worked with scientists for over 30 years in my career, and one of the regularities I saw is that they got into science and into the particular field that they went into because of somebody they cared about. Whether it was a sibling with a particular disease, and as a kid they didn't know how to help that sibling. Right. And so as an adult, they studied that particular disease in order to help people like their sibling, mm-hmm. or their mother or their father, or, there were so many stories like that right. People who go into science really do it because they want to make a difference in caring for other people.
I think it's so true. And we try to hide that or something, or not. It's not respected in a way because you're supposed to be so serious.
Well, and objective. You're supposed to
objective,
be,
right?
Like the myth of objectivity. Physics has blown that myth away, but in the other sciences, we're still trying to.
I think that's a very good point, and we don't have time to go into it, but I do think we need, that's why I do think there's a kind of realism and rigor and truth and shared reality that has to be understood as really part of this, that in each moment there are true, real answers from particular positions in particular landscapes. But we have to get much more rigorous about talking about all those parts rather than just saying there's one objective thing that's going to fit for everyone. Which is kind of the default right now, which, as you say, most physics and a lot of science and feminists a lot of different people have been trying to tell us that's not the case.
Yeah.
But it's not that nothing is true and anything goes either. That's also not true.
Right. Yeah.
But you're right. It begins in care. And I try to, I mean it in a real ontological, really radical way, that the body is mattering as care. I really that's part of the approach that I take, but also metaphorically, when we still are going to compete and all of the things that we do as humans, but if we start to understand that most of it's coming, all of it actually, the life itself is a caring towards, an urge to kind of communicate, then it shifts a lot how we come to different professions and how much patience we have with those who seem so opposite, right, from us.
Yeah. So I think you've already started getting into my, the final question, which looks towards the future then with regard to hope, which is what do you hope happens as a result of people applying your ideas?
Well, I guess one thing, people say I'm too I don't brag enough, or what's the word, too humble or whatever. But I do feel like I have to say they're not my ideas. They are, but I'm like a sieve or something that's kind of trying to put these in a different language. So, but I think what I really want is for us to take caring seriously in a way that's not cringe and all of this. I think it's kind of what we have to do. What's happening with the technology right now, and so many people I've talked to in the past few days have expressed a similar feeling of being overwhelmed, or they don't know what to do. They want to act, they don't know how to act. I think a lot of it might also be that, you know, the air quality has been so bad, and people are suffering, and they're just in a different state. The summer, it's so hot. But I feel like with this moment, we're in a transitional moment for sure. Mm-hmm. Maybe we always are, but we're in a shared transitional moment. And maybe we have been for, you know, the past 6 years, but right now, I think it's cracking us open in a sense that, like, almost pushing us onto the ledge of the third. And how can we help each other, right? I think caring is the answer. Letting ourselves care again as living bodies. Mm-hmm. Also, I think a lot of us are a little bit psychotic because we're living in virtual worlds. Even some of the smartest people in our world right now who are giving us a lot with a lot of technology, they are so acclimated to the regularities of a virtual world, which is one world among many, 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 many possible ones. Yeah. That's the only world that's actually being lived, and it's actually kind of turning away from all the things that world could open for us, which is new sensual ways of being together and communicating, new ways of maybe even like experiencing other living positions, like walking through the world and seeing it in a completely different way, right? Seeing it. Yeah. All these are possible now. And we're just not even thinking about it because we live in a weird virtual regularity world that's a little bit psychotic. So I think what I want is for us to come into our bodies, realize them as incredible possibilities for communication, and realize that we're much more than we've till now thought, and care for them and care for one another, and use all this amazing, powerful technology to better do that. Yeah. And some people you are, right? I mean, it's part of having conversations and reaching out. That's one way to do it. And going for walks and thinking about spiders. And, you know, I really think these seemingly little things are what's shifting what's possible for our shared paths together, right? What are we going to prioritize? What do we really care towards right now? Thinking about that and maybe shifting out of the habits that aren't towards that. If we do that on individual levels and together, huge things can happen.
Yeah. You know, if we stop caring so much about like money and care about the trees that are burning in Canada right now, that, you know, like they're so far away, but they're affecting us, you know, and you and I aren't very close together. You know, I'm in Chicago, you're in New York, and those same trees are affecting us.
Isn't that amazing?
You know, and yeah, like what if we had cared for those trees better?
And what if we had used our technology to understand better what's happening in the air and what we can do when something like this happens, and how we could better contain what's going on with the fire? Like, whoa, we have all this amazing possibility now, but we don't focus on the real lived world.
Yeah.
And I think anyone who knows, you probably know this, once you start getting back out into the world and off your screen, you do realize, oh my gosh, like there is a whole other living universe that feels very strange once you go back on the screen, right? You're like, oh, this is weird. And I think we have to help each other kind of animate and our existence in that space together, you know?
Yeah.
And then sort of orient towards how does this kind of wonderful technology help us look and take care of what's there? Because wow, it's like we've been given this amazing gift of being able to be aware of this incredible ongoing life all around us, and we're just not looking. We're like, you know, it's very much Plato's cave, right? We're just watching the things on the wall. Exactly.
We're looking at these.
So the more of us go out of the cave and like hug the trees and like feel the earth and touch grass and all of that, and help find ways to be okay doing that, because it's not easy, right, to be in the real world. That's part of why we want to escape.
Yeah, there's spiders out there.
There's spiders out there, but also people, you know, you have to worry about what you look like, and you have to eat, and you have, you know, there's all these things, and we judge each other, and like, let's stop doing that.
Yeah.
Let's start celebrating each other and this amazing opportunity to be here now and experience this. And then let's like go crazy with all these wonderful toys we have to help us do more of that.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Andrea. This has been a lot of fun. I knew it would be. It's always a joy to talk with you. And again, check out her website, andreahiott.com. I think I'll put all these links in the show notes below the video, and subscribe to her Substack, and go check out her podcast, Love and Philosophy. And anything else we need to tell people about?
Just thank you, Lisa. It's so sweet that you say all of that, and I love talking to you, and I love what the energy you're giving to the world. And thanks for, you know, spending some time talking to me about some of the things I've been doing. It means a lot.
Well, I appreciate that you're also like helping to make paradox less taboo in our culture. And let's talk again.
Yeah, and that's maybe something to mention, right? That we have this kind of paradoxis or paradoxis praxis kind of community, that like people who are wanting to explore this, what we've been talking about, like you, and there's many others who are doing it from different angles. And it is becoming kind of a praxis, or a way we can maybe stay in the tension and constellate together. So I guess I mentioned that too. And yeah, and thanks for your work too, right? And you should listen to the talk about Lisa's book, Embracing Paradox, which is on love and philosophy.
Yeah.